morning, gents. Thank you for being patient with me yet again. It is the 20th today. Damn! I'll be glad when this lockdown thing is over, because the days are just really, I just can't tell what day it is anymore. They're all just melting together. Anyway, we're back today with the final chapter of installment 4 of The Reaper and the Scribe. After today's venture, which is not too lengthy, we'll be heading into Book 5, Atkinson's Armageddon. But let's see what things turn out like for John Smith now and Atkinson and everybody in Chapter 48 of The Reaper and the Scribe, coming to you from Hamtopia. This is Beverly, and thank you for joining me and Paul today. Chapter 48. Tamara stood back and watched her sister wielding her broadsword as if she was dancing with a feather. She could not believe how quickly the young girl had taken on board what she needed to learn. The sword looked like an extension of her arm. "I know you are there," said Sarah impishly as she twirled the sword 3 times round and swished it into its scabbard in one move. "I can't believe it. You are ready." "Ready for anything!" shouted Sarah as she danced towards her sister. "I almost don't want to take you back," frowned Tamara. "But I want to go back, to put things right, and then marry my Gavin," sang Sarah. "I'm pleased to see you still have your human emotions." "I bet Gavin'll be glad too," said Sarah. "Now you must meet someone before we return. Follow me into the house," Sarah encouraged Tamara. As they stepped through the door of what used to be Sarah's home long ago, a shadowy figure stood in the corner. "Don't be afraid, Sarah. He is in another dimension, but he wishes to speak with you. He is not here," instructed Tamara. "Sarah, your task is simple. Use whatever means that are available to you to kill the being known to you as Atkinson. Your weapons are only as strong as your heart. If you truly want to be with the being called Gavin Jackson, then you must kill Atkinson. There are now 3 of you, as Smith has finally realized his potential. Should one of you fall, the other 2 must carry on. Should 2 of you fall, the last of you has to kill him. For if all 3 of you fall, the 7th seal will be broken, and humankind will be no more. As we speak, the seals are already opening. Time is short. The fate of everything you know rests in your hands. I have helped all I can. Sarah, if you fall, you will lose the side of you that is human, and everything that is human will be forgotten forever. So take care, brave girl. Keep the love in your heart. It's the one weapon that Atkinson does not have. With that, the shadowy figure of Dewhirst disappeared. Atkinson Junior stood under an old oak tree in the center of the woods. As he surveyed the area around him, he noticed the vegetation was dying in the pattern of a circle, moving slowly outwards. The old trees were left burnt and felled in its wake. To his amazement, great stones were rising up from the ground at the fire's perimeter. The huge druid stones groaned and creaked as they took their place, one after another. In each gap between the stones stood a long dead druid. It was as if nature itself was lending a hand and holding off this beast. This circle of stone and a long-forgotten religion won't stop me, laughed Atkinson. The druids all pointed their staffs at Atkinson, and from each staff came a bright red beam of light, all pointing towards the beast. The light engulfed Atkinson, and for a time held him in that spot, as if frozen. As the druids pointed their staffs, they knelt down on one knee, keeping the beam of prehistoric laser light fixed on its target. Behind each druid, a witch stood, with arms stretched upward, drawing down with their incantations of vast energy right onto the head of Atkinson. By now, Atkinson was feeling all the force of this primeval earth power. He had not expected this turn of events. His body was starting to feel the effects of the enormous gravity, like pressure that was weighing him down. As he fell to his knees, he took his mighty sword and struck it deep into the earth. At the same time, in the other realm, his father raised his sword. At first, Dewhirst thought he was finally going to finish it, but to his horror, the old god sent his son power. At this point, all three planes merged. In the living world, Atkinson pulled his sword out of the ground and raised it into the air. All the force attacking him rebounded to his captors, sending them back from whence they came, and the stones collapsed into dust. In the other realm, Dewhirst drew his sword and knocked his partner's sword from his hand. Dewhirst lunged forward with his own sword in the first ever duel in this realm. Atkinson Senior moved out of the way, regained his sword, and struck back at Dewhirst, who blocked his strike with an upward glance of his sword. Each blow of these two swords sent shock waves through the earth, leaving earthquakes and volcanic eruptions all over America, China, Russia, in fact, all over the world, in places that had never had seismic or volcanic problems, such as England and other parts of Europe. Every blow of the sword sparked a new eruption or earthquake somewhere in the world. The San Andreas Fault opened a crack in the earth, and many cities disappeared into the sea, creating mountainous tsunamis across the Pacific Ocean. Every geological plate was now shifting worldwide, and buildings were burying their inhabitants. Rivers of molten lava now flowed through every continent, for every blow from the two old gods brought more and more destruction. The tranquil forest of Sarah's dream had now turned into a nightmare of biblical proportions. Tamara took Sarah's hand, and in the next instant they were transported back to the old accountancy firm. John Smith was waiting as they returned. A confident John Smith smiled as the two girls, both still warrior-clad, arrived. "Not a moment too soon," announced Smith. "What the hell has happened?" demanded Tamara. "Hell itself," replied John. The two girls ran to the window. There was destruction everywhere. The sky was red with burning buildings and lava flows. Lightning crashed to the earth, charging the air with electricity, with thunder so loud it went off the decibel scale. The inhabitants of the city were scared and confused, scampering around, trying to find shelter. The two gods carried on, blow after blow after blow, as more and more destruction befell Earth. The other realm where they existed was getting brighter and brighter from the huge sparks flashing from their divine blades. The building that Gavin Jackson had called home since his arrival was now in a poor state. Large pieces of masonry, steel, and glass were falling all around him as he made for the stairwell. Some unfortunate people in the building had taken the elevators, just as the main elevator in the building collapsed, sending them screaming to their untimely deaths. As broken glass and twanging restraint steel flashed past his head, Gavin made his way down to the underground car park, only to find his Jaguar smashed under fallen concrete. The only way out was blocked. Gavin looked about him at the destruction and devastation. As he sat at the stairwell, the lights dimmed, then extinguished. As the roof caved in on the old police station, C.I. Johnson asked if everybody had made it out. "All except D.I. Lambert, sir," said the young police officer that he'd only met that morning. "Get as many as you can and try helping the people that are trapped. I'm going for Lambert." "No, sir, you can't go in there. It's too dangerous. It's all falling down." "Do as I say," retorted the chief inspector as he ran into the collapsing police station. The epic battle in the other realm was drawing to a close, with both gods wielding their blades with furious anger. Crash after crash, blade upon blade, God against God. Dewhirst was first to draw divine blood as his blade tore into Atkinson's arm. Atkinson quickly retorted with a back swipe, taking off Dewhirst's lower arm. Unfortunately For Atkinson Senior, it wasn't the sword-wielding arm. With a flash of his left arm, Dewhirst's last swing parted Atkinson's head from his body. As Atkinson fell, what was left of his power burst from his body, knocking his assailant to the ground. The force of the other realm partially imploding on itself and then exploding could be felt by everything living or dead, human and animal alike, all over the crumbling world. As the dust settled at the epicenter of all of this divine demonic unrest, everyone had taken cover or was dead. All that is, except 4 giant beings, 3 of them at one end of what used to be High Street, and 1 at the other. Mayhem and confusion reigned. Explosions could be heard, screams of the sick and dying, and the constant rumble of buildings collapsing comprised the backdrop of possibly the last battle of humankind. It wasn't, as some predicted, international superpowers with their atomic bombs, nor was it an asteroid leaving its orbit. No, this biblical holocaust was to be between 3 enchanted warriors and 1 demented god, the latter wielding power that humankind, with all its knowledge, could not begin to understand. Atkinson smirked as he looked at his one-time lover and confidant, his hapless surrogate, and the bitch who had stopped him last time. He shouted, "I am the power, and now the god of the underworld. If you yield at my feet, I promise your death will be quick and painless." Atkinson stood with his arms folded, awaiting their answer. John Smith turned to the 2 girls, almost in a huddle, as if discussing what Atkinson had just proposed. In fact, he was handing the girls items from Atkinson Senior's armor. Smith placed the amulet around Tamara's neck. He placed the gauntlet on Sarah's hand and wrapped the cloak with its hood down on himself. "These ancient weapons will buy us time while we wear him down," said Tamara. "Only our combined strength will win this day, and we must, because this time he must die," she continued. In the dark, silent grave of his home, Gavin Jackson waited for the emergency services to arrive. As his eyes adjusted to the dimness of his situation, he noticed a pinhole of light breaking through the debris. He carefully crept on his hands and knees, trying to avoid the crushed cars and masonry. Slowly, he made his way through to the light and started pulling out stones and cupping dirt and loose rubble with his hands. At the police station, the chief inspector had made his way back into the demolition site that used to be his workplace. "Donna! Donna!" shouted the chief inspector, but there was no reply. He ripped wood and bricks out of his way. He made it up what was left of the staircase to his office. Inside, he saw D.I. Lambert on the floor, crushed and lifeless. He frantically tried to remove all the debris from his workmate and lover, but to no avail. It was just too heavy, and more masonry, roof tiles, and wood were still falling on her and him. He knew that he had to get out. He made it back downstairs as the entire building collapsed around him. The doorway was getting smaller and smaller as he ran towards the ever-closing aperture. Just as the entire building totally collapsed, he emerged in a cloud of dust without his fallen comrade. "Enough stalling!" shouted Atkinson. "Who among you will face me first?" "Do you want me to kill you again? I've heard all I can take of testosterone-fueled bullshit, Atkinson," scorned Sarah as she charged towards her foe. Atkinson raced to meet her, sword outstretched, with anger and revenge in his eyes. "It seems your training hasn't removed any of Slab Girl's uniqueness," laughed Smith as he charged forward. Tamara smiled with confidence as she watched her brave sister, shouting to John Smith, "Pull your hood on, John!" Slightly puzzled, he did what she asked and instantly disappeared, now truly able to be in the same space as Atkinson. Atkinson and Sarah met in the middle, and sparks flew from their swords. Atkinson found it hard to believe that this once tiny girl was so strong, so he swiped her legs from under her. As she fell off balance, he brought his sword down onto her head, but a flash of sparks flew from his sword as the invisible John Smith's sword stopped his blade from hitting its target. Sarah rolled sideways and withdrew as Tamara moved in on Atkinson. With his sword still raised, she thrust her sword right into his midriff. Gavin had, by now, burrowed his way out of his tower block and realized for the first time the full horror of what was happening around him. It looked the way most people depicted hell. The sky was red, and what appeared to be lava was flowing down the hills on the horizon. On the road was a motorbike with its engine still running. He quickly removed the dead rider and roared off in the direction of Main Street. At the police station, the devastated but still in control Chief Inspector Paul Johnson dusted himself off and gathered his people. Police officer Linda Harper came running from the town center. As she tried to catch her breath, she screamed, "There are giants fighting in Main Street. Come on, people, gather whatever you can to arm yourselves and follow me." The police started running towards Main Street. As they ran, More and more people joined what was becoming an angry mob. By the time they arrived, they were 1,000 strong. In the middle of High Street, the battle was raging. Atkinson had dodged the thrust from Tamara's sword and was matching his 3 assailants, blow for blow. Streams of sparks were lighting up the whole area. He had not noticed the crowd that had built up on the fight's perimeter. The battle grew more intense as Atkinson began to back off slightly. Sarah was first to take advantage of Atkinson's withdrawal, while Tamara and Smith kept up the pressure. Sarah leapt over Atkinson, catching him across his neck with her sword. He immediately turned and raised his sword, but Tamara thrust her sword into his side. Atkinson recoiled his sword to knock Tamara's away, and with the same swing caught John Smith in the arm. To Atkinson's horror, Sarah thrust her sword into his back, but he would not fall. Again he turned to Sarah and lifted his sword, but the best shot of Johnson's career sent his sword spinning out of his hand. All the time this battle was raging, the weather was worsening because of the close proximity of Atkinson and Smith. The armor Smith was wearing made it possible for their blades to actually touch each other, but it was causing devastation all around them. Atkinson noticed the crowd that had built up. With a simple wave of his arm, every one of them hit the floor. As if by magic, his sword lifted from the ground and landed back in his hand. John Smith took this opportunity to swipe at Atkinson. He opened a wound deep into his side. As if not hurt in the slightest, Atkinson turned and struck John Smith on the head with the hilt of his weapon. The hit sent him sprawling on the ground. Smith pulled the hood of his cloak over his head, rendering him invisible and instantly healing the gaping wound on his forehead. Smith felt invigorated and rejoined the battle hooded, so Atkinson had to deal with a sword he couldn't see. Even with that disadvantage, Atkinson maintained the upper hand. Although Tamara and Sarah were fighting with superhuman strength, they were beginning to lose the battle, and Atkinson seemed to be getting stronger. He was delivering blow after blow on all 3 of his opponents. As Atkinson gained the initiative, he knew the end was near. His 3 foes were beaten. All that was left was the last dispatch. He drew back his sword to deliver the last hit. As his blade began its downward swish, suddenly a motorbike roared through the air, and the front wheel embedded itself into Atkinson's back, knocking him down and unseating the rider. "Go get him, Sarah!" shouted Gavin Jackson as all 3 warriors swiped their swords at the same time. John Smith's blade separated Atkinson's legs from his torso. Tamara's blade pierced Atkinson's heart, and Sarah's blade separated his head from his body. All that was left of Atkinson fell for the very last time. All, that is, except for his head, which was held aloft for the gathered masses to see, most of whom had no idea what had just taken place. All, that is, except a policeman, a coroner, and a journalist. And as for the reaper and the scribe, we shall see.